Learn Angular for beginners. Introduction, setting up Angular, getting started with Angular basics, working with forms and validation, services and dependency injection, routing and navigation. Conclusion. Introduction. Welcome to the world of Angular. If you're new to front-end development, you might have heard a lot of buzz about Angular, and for good reason. Angular is a comprehensive and popular JavaScript framework that simplifies the development process significantly. Angular is maintained by Google and is widely used in modern web applications. With a brief history that dates back to 2010, it's been actively developed and maintained ever since. Before diving into Angular, there are a few prerequisites you'll need. Familiarity with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is a must. Understanding basics like components, modules, templates, services, and dependency injection will go a long way in making the learning process smoother. Let's get started. Setting up Angular. So, you've decided to brave the world of Angular? Good for you. You won't regret it. But first things first, setting up Angular. The installation process is pretty straightforward. You'll need Node.js and NPM on your machine, so go ahead and install those. Once you've got them up and running, it's just a matter of running a few simple commands to install Angular on your machine. Next up, understanding the file structure. This is where things get a little hairy. But don't worry, we are in this together. Angular projects have a specific file structure, and it's important to understand how it works before diving in. Take some time to familiarize yourself with the way files are organized in an Angular project. Now, creating a new Angular project. This is where the fun begins. You've got options here. You can use the Angular CLI, or you can create a project from scratch. Either way, make sure you've got a good understanding of what's going on before jumping in. And that's it. Setting up Angular isn't all that hard once you know what you're doing. Just remember to take it slow, read the docs, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Getting started with Angular basics. Geek alert. It's time to get started with Angular basics. Brace yourself for some mind-bending concepts and crazy terms that I'm sure you'll come to love. Let's dive in. Components, modules, and templates, oh my. These three amigos make up the foundation of Angular development. A component is essentially a self-contained chunk of UI with its own HTML, CSS, and TypeScript files. It's like a Lego brick that you can plug into your app wherever you need it. A module is a collection of related components, services, and other code that you want to group together. It's like a container that you can use to organize your app's features. And a template is the view part of a component, the HTML that shows up in the browser. Now that we've got the basics down, let's talk about some of the cool stuff you can do with components. Interpolation and property binding are two ways to dynamically update your app's UI. Interpolation is when you embed a variable's value directly into the HTML, like my variable. Property binding is when you bind the value of a component property to an HTML element property, like src equals my image. But what if you want your app to respond to user input? That's where event binding comes in. You can bind an event, like a click or a key press, to a method in your component. When the event happens, the method gets called. It's like a trigger that sets off some code. Alright, we're almost there. Last but not least, let's talk about directives. Directives are a way to manipulate the DOM based on your app's logic. Structural directives, in particular, let you add or remove elements from the DOM. The for directive is a superpower that lets you iterate through a list and create multiple instances of a component. It's like magic. Phew. That was a lot to take in. But fear not, practice makes perfect. Keep playing around with these concepts, and soon you'll be an Angular ninja, working with forms and validation. Now, let's dive into the world of forms and validation in Angular. As we know, forms play a critical role in web applications, whether you're capturing user information or submitting data to a server. Angular provides two types of forms, template-driven and reactive forms. With template-driven forms, the form controls are created within the template itself, and the validation logic is handled on the template level. On the other hand, reactive forms provide more control over the form controls, and their state is managed programmatically. Form validation is crucial for ensuring data consistency and accuracy. With Angular, we can perform validation either on the template level or programmatically. We can also create custom validators to meet our specific needs. So, whether you prefer the simplicity of template-driven forms or the programmatic control of reactive forms, Angular has got you covered. Now, let's move on to services and dependency injection. Services and dependency injection. Alright, let's talk about services and dependency injection in Angular. Services in Angular are essentially functions or pieces of code that you can reuse throughout your application. They're a great way to keep your code dry, don't repeat yourself, and modular. But why do we need them? Well, if you've got a small app, you might be able to get away with repeating code or just using a few global variables. But as your application grows, it quickly becomes unmanageable and you're going to want to separate things out into reusable chunks. That's where services come in. Now, let's talk about dependency injection. It's a fancy term, but it really just means passing in a dependency, i.e. a service, to another part of your application that needs it. This is useful because it makes your code more decoupled and easier to test. Instead of hard coding your dependencies, you're injecting them at runtime. Creating and using services in Angular is pretty straightforward. You can use the @injectable decorator to mark a class as a service, then inject it into other components or services using either constructor injection or property injection. The Angular dependency injector takes care of the rest. So, in summary, services are reusable bits of code that keep your app dry, and dependency injection is a way of passing those services around in a decoupled and testable way. Easy enough, right? Let's move on to routing and navigation. Routing and navigation. So, you've learned the basics of Angular. Congratulations! But, now what? How do you actually navigate through your Angular app? That's where routing and navigation come in. Understanding Angular routing is the first step. Routing allows your app to have multiple views and routes that change the view based on the user's interaction. Once you understand how routing works, setting up routes in Angular is a breeze. Navigating between routes is the main feature of routing. With Angular, you can navigate between routes by using a router link directive or a programmatic navigation using the router service. Passing data between routes is also possible by using route parameters. But, let's not forget about lazy loading. By lazy loading, you can load different parts of your app only when the user needs it. This helps your app to load faster and your users to have a seamless experience. Overall, routing and navigation are essential for any Angular app to function correctly. With practice, you'll be routing and navigating like a pro in no time. Conclusion. So there you have it. We've covered a lot of ground in this Learn Angular for Beginners blog. We've talked about what Angular is, how to set it up, and all of the basic concepts like components and templates, event binding, and form validation. We've also gone over services, dependency injection, and routing and navigation. Don't fret if you didn't catch everything, it's a lot to take in. But fear not, because this is just the beginning of your Angular journey. There's so much more you can learn and explore now that you have the basics down. Keep coding and experimenting, and who knows? Maybe one day you'll be an Angular expert yourself.